Well, as we count down the final hours before the Archbishop Desmond Tutu's funeral, one of the people who was ordained by Tutu and spent much time studying him is the Reverend Dr. Michael Battle. He joins us now, in fact, from New York. He's the director of the Desmond Tutu Centre General Theological Seminary in New York. Father Battle, good day to you, sir. Good evening to you, and thank you very much indeed for your time. I really do appreciate it. We can see from your work that the Arch had a great impact on you and your life and perhaps even your beliefs. I'm also thinking of the people who had an impact on the Arch himself. I'm thinking of people like Trevor Huddleston, for example. What kind of impact did he have on Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu?
Sure. You know, the Arch had such a powerful impact in what's considered a political sphere. It's so obvious that, you know, he became Archbishop of the province of Southern Africa that sometimes we forget that he had deep spiritual training, even so much to be trained by monks, the Community of the Resurrection, which was being led by Trevor Huddleston. I heard earlier on your newscast about when the Arch was young, he fought several diseases, and Trevor Huddleston would visit the Arch, especially during those times the Arch was fighting sickness. And Trevor Huddleston had a huge impact, not only on the Arch, but on the Arch's family. As you can imagine, during those times of apartheid, a white man, a British white man at that, topping his hat off to the Arch's mother, really impacted the Arch to see that, you know, apartheid doesn't have to be. And I think the spiritual training by the Community of the Resurrection, Trevor Huddleston specifically, gave that imagination to the Arch.
This was at a time when it was deliberate apartheid government policy to deepen the divides, to raise the walls between people. And while this was happening, the Arch's thinking was actually going the other way. He was more about actually government is doing this, and yet his thinking was going more and more in the direction of we all need to be together. He was going against the flow at the time.
Yeah, as you know, I'm sure, the Arch has taken hits from all sides. He's taken hits from the sides of certainly of those who were perpetrators of apartheid and policies that segregated people. But he also took attacks from the black progressive activist side as well for selling out, for not holding to retributive justice and so on. So I think you're exactly right. I mean, the Arch has been someone who has articulated Ubuntu, which has spread around the world. And that Ubuntu is not just for those we love, it's for those who are our enemies, that no matter who you are, our identities are interdependent.
During this time, I mean, you talk about him taking hits, you talk about, you know, the persecution during the apartheid era. Where did his strength come from? I mean, it would have come from his family, but it must also have come from his faith and from the Bible.
Well, you know, the first time I met the Arch, he was on sabbatical in Atlanta, United States. And I was doing my PhD, and I went to him to beg him to let me do this PhD. I had my hat in my hand, and the first thing he said to me was, "Let us pray." And when he said that, that let me know the answer to your question, that he's a man of deep faith, deep spirituality. I had an opportunity to actually live with the Arch in Cape Town, and I saw firsthand his habits, and his contemplative life gave him the resources from which not only to have longevity, but to be able to be a wise leader, to be able to say the right things at the right time, to think through holistic answers, not just off-the-cuff answers, and to be an elder, a sage.
I think, if I remember correctly, I read somewhere that he was one of, or perhaps the most qualified person in his position, I think as a dean in Joburg, that South Africa had ever had. He was someone of deep learning, even as a younger man. He literally knew more, had spent time learning more than anyone else in his position.
Yes, and not just locally. You know, he was trained overseas. He worked for the World Council of Churches. He lived in the UK. He had a global perspective and loved education. He loved learning, You probably have already mentioned, he really wanted to be a medical doctor early on, mostly because of the diseases that he faced as a child. But then he had this epiphany to know that he was called to be not just a church leader, but to be a very thoughtful leader that was engaged with the powers of the world.
There was a huge conflict. I mean, this was a time when he was preaching from the pulpit in the 1970s, the 1980s. At the time, the apartheid government had its own preachers, if I can call it that. They may disagree with that contention. But they were preaching something else. They were using, I suppose, in the main, the NG Kerk, as it was then. It's changed now very much. But they were saying, this is what God believes in division. They were quoting certain parts, I think, of the Old Testament, I think misquoting perhaps. He was quoting something very different. So you have this image of disputes within Christianity, both sides, if I can call them that. They're far more than just two sides. Both claiming that God was on their side. I mean, we know which side God was on, don't we?
Yeah, I think you got some good insights there. I mean, apartheid was a theological construct in the first place. Apartheid, D.F. Malan and other architects of apartheid were seminarians, ordained in the church. And so it was a theological worldview that God was preferring the white Afrikaner, who was against all odds, called to be the trustees of Africa. So they had this spirituality, this religion, that God was on their side. And keep in mind, I come from the United States. I'm an African American. And one of the advantages that Martin Luther King Jr. had that the Arch did not have was the Constitution. And so during apartheid, the Constitution, of course, was in the favor of those in power, those with this kind of theology and the constructs of apartheid, a caste system in which there was this heresy, a heresy of saying that God was on the side of white people.
I mean, it's in a way strange to think that was the case now, because so much has changed, and yet in so many ways, especially economically, so much hasn't changed. There was a consistency, I think. I think looking now at the life, I mean, to us, I'm a younger man than you, I suspect, there seems to be almost a moral clarity to the Arch. Is that right? I mean, through doubt, faith, did that clarity come through doubt, or was that faith always there, do you think?
Yeah, I think for someone like me who's an outsider looking into South Africa and into all that you cover, I think it's difficult for a fish to know it's wet. And usually the great artists, the great leaders are not recognized until they pass away. Look at Picasso's artwork and so on. It doesn't increase in value until he died. I think, and what I'm surprised by being in the United States, looking at what's happened with the Arch's passing, it's really powerful to see the impact he's had, not just in South Africa, but around the world. A response to the Arch passing away has been of great lament around the world. So I think what I'm concerned about are the younger generations. I'm concerned about what we just talked about in terms of the two sides that have problems with the Arch, trying to hold people together. I hope the younger generations will see the wisdom of moving toward restorative justice, not just retributive justice. I hope that the Arch is holding us together, not just in South Africa, but this experiment that has been going around the world with Truth and Reconciliation Commissions and there have been other Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, but none as robust as what the Arch led.
We've spoken about the fight against apartheid and racial oppression. But I think there's also perhaps another lesson, and I'm asking this question, I'm not stating it. The other lesson is that the fight against injustice continues. So he fought for the ordination of women in the Anglican Church. I mean, now completely normal. Then very contentious. The NGK has women ministers now. For the rights of gay people, both in society and in law, and then again in the Anglican Church. He spoke about him taking hits from all sides earlier. He would have taken hits from all sides over an issue like that too. His fight against injustice continued, is my point.
For sure. In many ways, he was, as we say, a canary in the mine. As he would go, he would be, oftentimes ahead of his times, especially in the church, and he would be on the right side of history. For people who have that kind of vision, they often have to fight extraordinary battles, and in the midst of things, those who are in the midst of those battles see their own times. But he thought about people who were not even born yet, and trying to think through how the church can be a part of the solution rather than the problem. Unfortunately, our churches have often created the problems and have ostracized human identities instead of supported them and seeing people made in the image of God.
One of the phrases which defined our country, South Africa, for quite a long time was the idea of the rainbow nation. And it was his phrase, the rainbow people of God, which I was reminded he actually used, I think, in 1989, so before Nelson Mandela was released, before the end of apartheid. Again, a revolutionary statement. He had said in the 1980s that there would be a black president within his lifetime. Also a very contentious thing to say. When we look now at the fight for economic equality and social equality, social justice, the Black Lives Matter movements in your country and here, we see people taking a knee as a reminder of that. But we also, I think, see that the struggle is by no means over, is what I'm trying to say. His legacy, I mean, you've studied him more than just about anyone else. His legacy for people, for all of us, who are struggling towards this idea of social justice, is it that right is right, that wrong is wrong? Is there something in that maybe?
Yeah, I think, thanks for the opportunity to talk about what I've studied in the Arch's life. I highly recommend to your audience a biography I just wrote on the Arch called Desmond Tutu, A Spiritual Biography of South Africa's Confessor. And I think in that, I've tried to make the claim that the Arch understood that things aren't just black and white, no pun intended there, but the Arch understood the complexities of human beings made in God's image. And differences are what God has created in us. Scientists know that. Differences of who we are is what makes the world beautiful. So yeah, I think if we're going to understand the Arch's legacy, I think it's what I was saying earlier about when history's written. He's going to be seen as someone ahead of his time, on the correct side of history, and always upholding human dignity.
Father Michael J. Battle, sir, I really appreciate the time. It's 3 minutes to 7 our time. It's 3 minutes to
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Yes.
3 minutes to 2022 in New York where you are. Sir, thank you very much indeed.